Guys, South Africa says it spent almost $18 million deported, or no, let's say helped repatriate more than 80,000 immigrants following protests and violence against illegal immigration, right? Now, according to the country's Home Affairs Department, the country has spent nearly 18 million accommodating and transporting immigrants who demanded to return to their home countries. And this is the interesting part. It has approached Malawi, Nigeria, and Ethiopia for reimbursement. Stay with me as we break down what is happening behind the closed door and what has actually triggered this request. This video will reveal something deep that is unfolding in South Africa and why every South African should be worried. Yes, every South African should be worried after watching this video. Now, today's big question is, did South Africa spend 18 million removing immigrants only to discover that their departure would cost their economy much more? Keep that question in mind because it will lead us directly to the elephant in the room. We will come back to it shortly. But before we get there, let us address two disturbing things unfolding in South Africa. And that is the reason why I said every South African must be worried. First is the internal battle within the government itself. The lack of coordination has become so obvious that the country appears unable to keep its own policies moving in one direction. I will explain. Tell me, why would a country become so worried about continental isolation that it sends its foreign minister to affected African countries to repair diplomatic relations, only to turn around just as tensions are beginning to calm and make another controversial demand that could reopen the same wounds? Now let me take you back a little bit. Not too long ago, Mr. Ronald Lamola recently traveled to Nigeria to strengthen relations and discuss migration, right? Governance and regional security, whatever. South Africa was clearly trying to calm the situation and repair the diplomatic damage. Then shortly afterwards, the same South Africa approached Nigeria and other African countries for reimbursement. This is even more provocative because Nigeria had already demanded compensation for legally documented Nigerians who fled South Africa and left behind their properties. But South Africa refused to accept responsibilities for those losses. Yet, it has now turned around to demand reimbursement from Nigeria. Make it make sense, How does that make sense? One part of the government is saying, let us repair our relationships, whilst another part is taking actions that produce the exact opposite results. What they are saying is, help us pay the cost of returning your citizens to you. And I don't think South Africa deliberately wants another diplomatic fight. No. The real problem is that different parts of the government appears to be pulling in opposite directions, and nobody seems able to hold everything together. Foreign Affairs wants to rebuild South Africa's relationships across the continent. Home Affairs wants to show South Africans that taxpayers will not carry the repatriation bills alone. But in pursuing these different interests without proper coordination, the government is repairing the relationship with one hand and damaging it again with another hand. That is very worrying. And this sends a very troubling picture of South Africa to the rest of the world, not to only Africa, right? It makes it look as though there is no clear leadership or common direction, and that every department is free to say or do whatever it wants, regardless of how it affects the country's wider interests. Now, the second disturbing thing is the hypocrisy this reimbursement demand appears to expose. South Africa now looks like a country that does not practice the same African solidarity it preaches. During the Sudan crisis in 2023, South Africa paid for 2 buses to evacuate not only South African citizens, but also citizens of SADC and other countries. It was presented as humanitarian assistance, Africans helping fellow Africans whose lives were in danger. Yes, Sudan was at war, so the circumstances were not exactly the same, right? But the contradiction is still difficult to ignore. South Africa was willing to help Africans escape danger in another country without treating that assistance as financial loss. Yet when Africans felt threatened inside South Africa itself and had to return home, South Africa calculated the cost and presented it as a bill. So what happened to the African solidarity South Africa displayed in Sudan? Why is helping Africans escape danger abroad considered humanitarian assistance, whilst helping them escape danger inside South Africa becomes a billable service? Explain that to me. Now back to the big question, the elephant in the room. This is going to reveal the truth, the facts, the myth, and everything there is to this reimbursement demand. Did South Africa spend 18 million removing immigrants only to discover that their departure would cost their economy much more? That's the question we are talking about, dealing with in today's video. Because if removing these immigrants was going to save South Africa hundreds of millions of dollars within the next year or two, just as Jacinta said in her recent press briefing, then the 18 million would not really be a loss. Let us listen to the video where Jacinta said the March and March has actually saved the government, the SA government, millions of money.
Thousands of immigrants who abused our healthcare facilities have also left the country, saving government millions in expenditure for medications, surgeries, clinics, and hospital admissions, and therefore many South African lives have been saved.
So if it has saved the government millions of money, then the 18 million would not really be a loss. It will be an investment, right? Because South Africa could proudly say, yes, we spent 18 million, but we have reduced unemployment, saved public money, and created opportunities for our citizens. That is it. But what if the expected benefits are not appearing, as Jacinta said? What if businesses are losing workers, production is slowing down, and some South Africans could also lose their jobs? Then the 18 million will no longer feel like an investment. It will feel like money spent sponsoring an economic loss. And that is what South Africa is feeling right now. And perhaps that is why South Africa is now trying to recover whatever part of the cost it can recover. Their biggest reality now is the economic consequences of losing so many immigrant workers, business owners, and consumers within such a short period. South Africa could not calculate what would disappear from the economy when the immigrants left, because immigrants were not only living in South Africa. They were not just there like we are in South Africa. They were working, they were renting rooms, buying goods, running businesses, and supporting production. And now the economic effect of their departure is beginning to show. Let's take Newcastle, for instance. In Newcastle's clothing industry, 3 factories reportedly by Router lost between 12% and 18% of their workers after the migrant exodus. Some sewing machines are standing idle, and factory owners have warned that continued disruption could threaten their businesses and the jobs of South Africans working alongside the migrants. Watch this video.
Machines stood idle at clothing factories in Newcastle after xenophobic protests drove thousands of migrant workers out of South Africa. Reuters visited 3 factories in late July whose owners said they had lost between 12% and 19% of their workforce during the protests. Factory owner Alex Liu said some of the workers had sewing skills that were in short supply.
We can't immediately replace this skill with local. It takes time.
Though Liu said the shortage could cripple businesses.
I think they are on the edge of shutting down. But simply because I think at the moment everybody's wait and see if they can survive.
That example tells us something important, right? You cannot remove a large number of workers from an economy and assume local workers will immediately walk in and replace them. Removing the workers suddenly without preparing replacements can still damage production. Research had already warned South Africa that immigrants were more connected to its economy than the political conversation flying around, right? An OECD and International Labour Organization study estimated that immigrant workers contributed approximately 9% of South Africa's GDP in 2010. Now think about 2026, how much they are contributing. And then a World Bank study covering 1996 to 2011 also found that each immigrant worker was associated with approximately 2 jobs for South African citizens. This means that migrant labor, consumption, and businesses created economic activity that supported other jobs in South Africa. This historical finding shows why South Africa should have expected the sudden departure of such a large number of people to create economic consequences, right? Now, I am not saying every immigrant is economically beneficial. Neither am I saying South Africa must ignore illegal migration. But look at what is happening. Businesses are beginning to report labor shortages and lost production. And unemployment, this is the most sensitive part. Unemployment has not suddenly fallen because foreigners left. Instead, South Africa's official unemployment rate increased from 32.7% to 33.6% in the second quarter of 2026. Now, I am not saying the migrant exodus caused that increase, but what I want you to know is that South Africa's unemployment problem is much bigger than immigration, and the increase challenges the promises that once foreigners leave, South Africans will automatically take their jobs and unemployment will fall. The economy is proving to be more complicated than the lies that flies around. So perhaps South Africa is beginning to ask, we have already paid the physical costs, 18 million, but why is the economic reward? If the economic reward is not appearing, recovering the 18 million suddenly becomes more urgent, and that is why they are focusing on getting that 18 million back. South Africa cannot easily recover the production already lost by a factory. It cannot force departed tenants to continue paying rent, right? It cannot force departed customers to continue buying from South African's business. It's not done, but it can write to Malawi, it can write to Nigeria and Ethiopia and ask them to help pay the visible bill. And this is my central argument. The reimbursement demanded may be more than ordinary accounting exercise. It may be a sign that the immigrant exodus is becoming more expensive than South Africa expected. So now, before South Africa asks other African countries to help pay the $18 million, it must answer a bigger question. What did South Africa expect to gain from spending that money? And has that gain actually appeared? Because if spending 18 million saves South Africa 100 million, then it was a good investment, right? And nobody is supposed to reimburse them. But if South Africa spent 18 million and is now losing workers, production, customers, and potentially South African jobs, then it did not simply pay to remove immigrants. It paid to create an economic loss and is now searching for somebody to share the bill. Now, what do you think, guys? Is South Africa right to demand that African government pay for the deportation of their citizens? Or is this reimbursement demand revealing that the immigrant exodus has become far more expensive than South Africa expected? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you found this analysis interesting, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. My name is Mami. summer. And until I come your way again, stay informed, stay connected, and keep believing in Africa.